Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. If you could take your seats. So today, this will be similar to the town hall that we did in January, whereas more so now what we're doing is we're providing clarifications as well as giving everyone the opportunity to ask questions. So this will be a general overview of the application process and allocation process. So first, we want to start off and say we're really excited for this upcoming July round. We'll go through, we'll provide this process orientation, and then we're going to enable everyone to ask questions for both DCHFA staff and DHCD staff. You can ask any general questions if there's anything that is project specific. We're all going to stay here afterwards. We can have lunch. Feel free to go ahead and grab DCHFA or DHCD staff. Staffers, can you stand up so everybody knows who you are? Yes, DHCD as well. Thank you for coming by DHCD. So regarding the DCHFA readiness review, I know we all talked about this in the November town hall, but the reason why we're introducing this process is that demand has exceeded our annual allocation for tax-exempt volume bond cap. So tax-exempt bonds are now inherently competitive. And this new process for 2023 is needed to gate projects and for us to allocate what's now a scarce resource. So the January allocation round used this process, and overall, it's going very smoothly. The major change for this July round is that now all projects can apply for readiness review, whereas in the January round, it was only the transition projects. For DCHFA readiness review, DCHFA will review projects for readiness in both January and July. So we're now approaching that July round. In terms of the process documents for everyone, all of that application information is available on the DCHFA multifamily mortgage revenue bonds page. And the project readiness items, really the major gating items for proceeding, are a completed stage 2 checklist, evidence of filing for construction permits with a minimum of 1 review, current letters of intent for all financing sources, estimates of construction pricing completed by your general contractor on the DHCD Form 215, and the DHCD threshold approval and evaluation score letter. In terms of clarifications and specifications for some of these items, the first one that we want to go through is permit review. In terms of evidence of filing for construction permits with a minimum of 1 review, this can consist of a review from a standard filing for construction permits or a review from an approved third-party reviewer under the Department of Buildings third-party program. The following will not be permitted: notes from a preliminary design review meeting, otherwise known as the PDRM, or a future promise of approvals through the accelerated plan review program without a review from the Department of Buildings. So it's important for folks to know that for that accelerated plan review, you actually have to have submitted. It can't just be the thought that you'll be able to move through that process more quickly without having any evidence of that filing for the permit review. For current letters of intent, all of the financing letters of intent must have terms that were provided within the prior 3 months of this July round. This is important because there's been a lot of volatility in the market, and we want to be sure that the pricing for equity and for debt is still current and reflective of market conditions. So if an LOI is dated prior to April of 2023, then a sponsor must either provide an updated LOI or provide correspondence with your account executive for debt or for equity, confirming that the letter of intent terms are still applicable. For the DHCD threshold and evaluation score, this DHCD threshold and evaluation score needs to be completed prior to submitting to DCHFA. So I know a frequently asked question is, can I apply in July to DCHFA for readiness? And can I also get my DHCD evaluation and threshold score in that same window? So it has to be, you have to apply in the prior period to DHCD, and then you'll have that letter in hand with your evaluation score that you can submit with your readiness application. So for the DHCD threshold review round for July, that was completed not completed, but that window closed in the first quarter of 2023. And when you submit to DCHFA, we need to see the entire letter. So not only your threshold determination, but also the evaluation score that's provided. One note is that if you have previously applied through an RFP through DC, you can go ahead and you can submit that letter. You don't have to go ahead and file for a new threshold review. In regards to the readiness application review, here's a general overview of the time frame for this. So folks will be applying in July, and DCHFA will be reviewing applications over approximately 2 weeks. After this 2-week period, we'll be reaching out to the sponsors that have applied and providing them with a 5 business day time frame to cure any errors or omissions associated with the application. After we've gone through this process, we'll do a final review with DCHFA staff, and DCHFA will finance projects based on the priority set by the DHCD evaluation score. So we'll be going through from high scores to low scores until the applicable bond cap for the funding round is used. After this review period by DCHFA, sponsors will be notified if projects have a complete application that is proceeding to underwriting for bond inducement. If they've submitted for an application that's deferred to a later round due to limited tax-exempt volume bond cap for that round, or if a sponsor has submitted an incomplete application that will be deferred to a later funding round. For DCHFA eligibility underwriting, after you've been notified that you're going to be underwritten for inducement, we're going to go ahead and we'll do a kickoff meeting for projects that are selected for underwriting, and our staff will be doing a tour of the site with the developers. Our staff will take approximately 6 to 8 weeks to underwrite these transactions, and we anticipate that inducement will be occurring approximately 6 to 8 weeks after that notification to proceed. DCHFA's regularly scheduled board meetings are on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of each month, and we can move forward with up to 4 projects for each meeting. That includes inducements as well as projects that are proceeding for final bond. All transactions must be approved by the DCHFA credit committee, and that credit committee takes place the week before each board meeting. This eligibility resolution for inducement from the board provides authorization from our board for 180 days. The eligibility resolution will require passive approval from DC Council, and that typically takes about 50 to 65 days. We often get questions on this eligibility resolution and the passive approval associated with that, so we're going to dive in there. For the eligibility resolution, what that does is that details and authorizes the issuance of DCHFA's tax-exempt bonds for qualified projects. Once the DCHFA board signs off on an eligibility resolution, it is then submitted to DC Council. Once it's submitted, there's a 30 legislative day passive review period, and this legislative day period excludes Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, and council recess, which is typically in July and August. This deemed approved date after it's checked into DC Council can be tracked through the DC Council system, which is known as LIMS. This eligibility resolution is typically deemed approved by the council after 50 to 65 calendar days. And one thing I wanted to note for everyone, I see folks taking pictures of slides. What we're going to do is we're going to record this, and it will additionally be posted on the DCHFA website. So, if you feel like you missed anything, it'll be up there in the next week or so. The next process that's specific to tax-exempt bonds is the TEFRA. The TEFRA, the formal name for that is the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is under Section 147F of the Internal Revenue Code. The issuer of the bonds must communicate its intent to issue bonds and the purpose for issuing them in a public hearing. So prior to that public hearing, there needs to be a notice for the public, and an advertisement for the TEFRA hearing needs to be posted to the DCHFA website approximately 7 days prior to the public hearing. The public hearings are currently held in a telephone conference, and a representative of the developer must attend that meeting. After that TEFRA hearing occurs, it needs to be actively approved by the mayor's office, and you need to factor 30 calendar days for that entire TEFRA process. The good news is that these two processes are happening on top of one another. It's not something where you have the DC Council passive approval and then you have to wait and do the TEFRA. So the TEFRA will, that'll be completed generally first, and then that DC Council approval will happen. So after we have the TEFRA process completed and we've gone through DC Council passive approval, the 42M submission must happen. And so this is something specific to DCHFA. The 42M submission authorizes the issuance of 4% low-income housing tax credits. We compile this package and we submit it to DHCD so they can go ahead and approve the 4% low-income housing tax credits. This package includes the following from the development team: the final Form 202 with the borrower's signature, the market study, as well as the construction schedule. There's several other documents. We'll be providing a checklist as we're approaching closing, but those are some of the major items. So this closes the general orientation. Reminding everybody that this town hall will be on the DCHFA MMRP page. So now DCHFA staff as well as DHCD staff are here, and we're happy to answer any of the questions that you have. If you have any project-specific questions, feel free to approach anyone who works at either agency afterwards. And then what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and any questions that are asked, we'll go ahead and we will record those in a questions document. So folks will have the benefit of reviewing all those answers over the next week or so. So with that, happy to take any questions. We have a microphone up front. Unfortunately, it's only set at the one height, so either you got to crouch or you got to pick it up. And please come up to the microphone. So those questions will be recorded, and folks will have the benefit of hearing those questions when they go through the recording.
Thank you for that,
Sure.
that summary, and your tip about the microphone. I just wanted to get some clarity about the timing of the different
Sure.
windows. So from my understanding now, it sounds like just for DCHFA, or I'm sorry, DHCD readiness, regardless if you're looking for soft funding, you should go in the January round in order to apply then for July. Is that for July readiness?
Mhm.
Or so DCHFA readiness and for soft funding. Okay, got it. If I could ask a second question, regarding the TEFRA and 42M submission, how soon after the notice to proceed, so the inducement period, do you go in for the TEFRA? I think I missed that.
Sure. So what we're doing is we realize that now the process that we're working through is generally more truncated. And so what we're doing is after we proceed with the inducement hearing, we're starting with our bond counsel RFP. And with that bond counsel RFP, we're choosing the bond counsel, doing conflict checks to ensure that we can work with that specific bond counsel. And once we have engaged bond counsel, we start those bond calls. Then we start on that TEFRA within the first 1 to 2 bond meetings. And so those bond meetings are generally held every week. And so we'll do it that way. And then, so that answers your question on the Tephra.
And that, sorry, that's
Sure.
the timing between, that's it. What was that?
So the timing
Between
between,
the-
that's,
So,
Tracy, do you mind speaking into the? And Tracy is our Deputy General Counsel, so she'll be able to answer this question better than me.
Hey, everyone. So I can give you an example. We had our board meeting last night. Well, not last night, on Tuesday night, excuse me. And so the deal was just induced. So we're about to select bond counsel either today or tomorrow. And that Tefra ad is gonna be the first thing that really is done once that deal is induced. So that ad is gonna go in the paper. We're probably gonna have that Tefra hearing, maybe I'm thinking off the top of my head, May 10th. And then we'll get the mayor's approval probably 2 weeks after that. So the TEPRA process is never going to be a critical path item. It is one of the things that is the first thing that we do to just kind of get it out of the way. It's rather perfunctory, but it is something that we have to complete. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
One quick question, but is it 10% over the expected bond amount, or what is the cap that you put in the Tephra?
Sure. So for the Tephra letter, what we're doing is we're sizing the tax exempt bond issuance at 54% of the aggregate basis. So that's what we're doing going into inducement. And then there's a 10% contingency on top of that.
Okay.
And then just for the benefit of everybody in the past, when tax exempt bonds are not a constrained resource, it might be something where you'd be able to get, a higher tax exempt bond amount. The agency, what we're looking at for all transactions to be good stewards of the resource, everything is at 54% on the aggregate of 54% on the 50% test. So if your aggregate basis is $100 million, then the tax exempt bond issuance would be $54 million. Sure. And so Aaron will be able to clarify.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Erin Wilson with DHCD. So I wanted to clarify on the timing question that you had about threshold review and then applying to DCHFA for readiness review. So if you are not applying for DHCD financing, then you would need to come into us before going to DCHFA. If you are applying for gap financing, we take that application for gap financing and do threshold review at that time because you're not ready to go to DCHFA yet, right? You have a gap in your financing. And so then in the future, when you are ready, you would apply for the DCHFA readiness review.
Do you mind coming to the mic? I just want this to be for the benefit of everybody on the
I
recording.
just want to be clear. So you said if you're not applying for gap financing, say you have another gap source, you can just apply directly for readiness approval for DCHFA. You don't have to apply for your threshold application.
No.
That's wrong. Okay.
Yes. No, yes, no. So first, no matter what, everyone has to have a threshold review and an evaluation score to go to DCHFA. And if you are not applying for any resources through DHCD, you do that review first, and then you can go in the next round to DCHFA. And that threshold review and evaluation score, I don't believe we have an expiration on that at this point. So like if you get your threshold review and evaluation score, go to DCHFA, there's not enough bond cap for your project, then you reapply in the next round to DCHFA with the same score. You don't want to be reapplying to us for threshold review and evaluation score. We don't want to be reviewing your project 15 times for those things. So at this point, there's not an expiration on those scores or that review. Me or him?
For you,
Okay.
but what if so threshold score is based on certain milestones. What if something approved on the project, so you'll get an even better threshold score. What do you do then?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are currently discussing how often we'll allow someone to come in. I think, I understand what you're saying, something could change with the project. I think from our perspective, the QAP and the RFP have been pretty consistent. Like, we had a pretty big overhaul in 2021, and we have a draft QAP out there now. And it's been pretty consistent. So to answer your question, that's a good question. We need to think about that a little bit.
Question for Scott. You've done such a good job of answering my previous clarification question about permit submissions. So here comes another one. I took a picture foolishly of the slides that you had earlier. The 2 bullet points you had: review from a standard filing and then a review from an approved third-party reviewer. The first bullet point about the standard filing, is that inclusive of what was formerly known as velocity as well as the good old-fashioned DCF or DOB review process? I just want to make sure that in the event that we choose what is now ARP, if you choose velocity, that process is inclusive of the acceptable permit review process.
So I'll clarify there. So in terms of if you file through the accelerated plan review, formerly known as velocity, you have to go ahead and actually have had a review completed. So if you were to have submitted, you have a first round of comments through velocity, that's acceptable. So that would fall under the same traditional review from the Department of Buildings. The concern is if folks come in and they say, velocity, I can do this in 2 months, 3 months. This is not a critical path item, therefore I don't need it. That's something where that doesn't work with the process and really being a good steward of this resource, because there's no confirmation for us as the agency to ensure that you are as far along as you are. So that's a good question, Chris. And we're going to take note of that. We can have that as a clarification on the website. So you'll have that written down. And I think for questions folks were having about what's going on with the QAP and that evaluation score, one note that I've been providing for sponsors as we're having regular conversations in the past, the score may not have mattered as much because it wasn't a competitive process. It's something where you pass threshold and that score wouldn't be as important. Now that we're in a new environment, you really want to put your best foot forward and try to have the most competitive score that you can, because it's an important part of our evaluation when these tax exempt bonds become competitive.
Right, so I know this is probably a repeat of the previous questions, but can you walk me through the timing of, you're starting with the project, you're moving along, you're gonna need soft funding. And just in relation to the various timing deadlines, so what are the steps? Your very first step is to apply for a QA with the QAP the next time round it comes out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so your first step would be you want to go to DH first. And so that can be, Erin, if you want to jump in.
Yeah.
I'll tap Erin.
Okay, so if you are applying for our financing for DHCD financing, you can come to us, do your threshold review and your application for financing all in one go.
And is that at the timing of the QAP twice a year?
Good question. So just as DCHFA has January and July,
Yeah.
we open a threshold review, which right now in January, so we just had one that we're currently evaluating. And then we'll have another one in July. The one in July will be associated with other funding resources.
So every year, the July application for the QAP is going to be for both threshold and funding.
Yes,
January, it's just threshold if you don't need other funding. Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
But you can also come in July. If you don't need our money, you can come
Still
in.
come in July.
Yeah.
If you don't need funding, you can come in January or July. If you do need funding, it's the July. You start with the QAP and the threshold is part of the QAP or.
Yes. So the QAP is aligned with the RFP and the QAP governs tax credits,
Okay.
obviously. And so the criteria in the QAP aligns with how you'll be applying to us.
I mean the NOFA. I
Okay.
apologize.
That's okay.
I'm getting my.
Okay.
Stuff when I say QAP.
No
So
worries.
the NOFA is, so you apply for the NOFA. If you need funding, you apply in July and the July, right?
Correct.
Okay, and then the application to DCHFA, that comes after we hear back from the NOFA?
Yes. So typically projects that are coming to us for financing still have some work to do, right? To be ready to go, to meet the readiness requirements for DCHFA. So ideal world, you're probably at least looking at a January or July submission to DCHFA to be ready for that. So if you come to us this July,
Okay,
right? And you say, this is how much money I need, you pass threshold, you score well, we have resources for the project. It's possible that you could go in January if you're very ready to DCHFA. But you have to meet all the requirements, right? And we don't often see projects that are ready to move that quickly. There could be some out there.
okay, so it's still on the 6th, so if we apply in July with the NOFA, and let's say we get awarded, then we go ahead and kind of keep moving and doing our work. Then we would come back if we were ready, which is tough, but we could be potentially ready in July for the initial, for the readiness. And if we miss July, then a year later, then we applied for the readiness.
Kind of. So you come to us July, you're moving really quickly, you get everything ready by January to apply to DCHFA for readiness review for bonds. That's possible. If you can't make that, then you would go to July 2024.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And in terms of the timeframe, what seems to be pacing things is your drawings. And so, if you're applying in July, it would be very hard to have a permit set ready within 6 months. But and then just one other clarification. I know we're talking about
9 months. Cause I'm technical and I like to
Sure.
but it's really 9 months because I can possibly, cause right, it's due in March, right? If it comes out in January, it's due in March and it's July. In July, I release my architect to do permit set. That's 9 months of work. That's 9 months of work. Third party review, if you schedule it right, it's really 10 days. So I could have my comments in because the timeline works. It is realistic. I feel it's realistic depending on the project size.
sure.
And like usually the 100 units project size, that's very doable for architects. It's SDs, CDs. It don't take that long and permit sets are usually just 75-80% set. So I think it's doable. It's not that hard for at least, I don't know if there's any other developers here, but I think the timeline you can apply in July and easily make it in. If you get award, of course, if you meet threshold and score favorably, you can actually make that.
Oh, that's really helpful context. And then I know we're using evaluation score and threshold, just for the benefit of everybody. The threshold is that you pass the threshold to receive 4% low-income housing tax credits, whereas the evaluation score is, that's something where that's the score that you're providing through the QAP. So just wanted to mention that to folks in case, there are people here on, viewing this later that wanted that clarification.
I didn't want to hold time, just to make sure everybody had a chance to ask questions, but just a couple other questions about timing and scoring. The first question is more for Aaron. After the release of the NOFA, do you have an idea about when or how long folks will have to respond to the NOFA? And before you start, I think it may be a tag team response on scoring. Is it at all possible for you to give us a kind of an idea of where scoring could or should end up in order to be competitive for this next round, given you've gone through one round? That's a thanks.
Yep. So in terms of timing of release of the RFP and due date, last RFP in 2021, we had a pretty quick turnaround time. So we had 2 application deadlines. We had a pretty quick turnaround time for the first one. And we received a lot of feedback that it was too fast. I believe it was 60 days, but don't quote me on that. So typically we do a 90-day response period. So if it's coming out in July, that means it would be due in October or November. So that's that question. In terms of scoring, we do not provide information on average score at this point. We do have new requirements around reporting scoring for projects that are selected through the RFP and are using HPTF, Housing Production Trust Fund financing. So that is really the mechanism of reporting out what was selected and what the scores were. Scott can add.
Aaron did a good job. I don't have anything to add, but happy to field any additional questions for folks.
This may be a difficult question. With the volume cap issues and the reduction in HPTF, in addition to scoring, is there going to be any consideration on project size and trying to maximize the number of projects versus dedicating a lot of resources to larger projects?
Sure. So that is a good question. And I can walk you through what's contemplated as of now. There is a 20% cap for tax exempt volume on cap per project. So, and that 20% is based on the annual allocation. So for 2023, we received $358 million and change. And so you could not receive more than 20% of that per project. But in terms of a prioritization associated with, smaller projects, mid-sized projects, things like that, I think that for the process that DCHFA is using, that's not contemplated in the readiness review and our onboarding of projects. I'm going to tip it off to Aaron. I'm not sure if size is contemplated in the QAP.
No, I can
Sure.
answer a little bit. I think that's a really good question. Obviously we're entering a different resource environment at this point, and DHCD is really conscious about making sure that every public dollar goes as far as it can. Right now, there is no cap limitation on project size or total subsidy per unit. I think we are looking at everything at this point. Are there changes that we need to make to respond to the environment that we're in now? So right now, no, beyond what Scott said.
I think just to add, we appreciate your questions, and I think that having this conversation is helpful so we get feedback from the market here. So we'll be able to write down these questions, and we'll know that these are questions that are coming up, things to contemplate as we're thinking about policy going forward.
Could it be specific dates? Because sometimes with people on vacation, like it's just to manage expectations to be able to respond within the limited amount of response time.
Mhm.
So if it could be expect to be this date, responses required by this date. We can manage expectations. I think in
Yeah.
the past, all people who are on vacation, who knew how to do something, sometimes certain team members, it is a team application, but everyone has a role.
That's helpful feedback. And so we don't have those specific dates as of today.
Yeah,
But for our staffing as well as, developers, we want to set that expectation early on. So those specific dates will be published as we near. I'm hoping that we can get that out with some leeway or runway for everybody, so you guys will know if you do have to accommodate. Yep.
We're notified that we get an award for QAP and we're working along. Is the DCHFA readiness review, is that competitive also?
So the way that you think about it is with you receive your evaluation from DHCD, we go through and there's a hurdle. And so that hurdle is DCHFA readiness review. You have to have a complete stage 2 application and you have to fulfill all of those readiness items, and they have to fulfill the requirements that we've published. So if you're over that hurdle, there are some projects that'll make it over that hurdle. There are some projects that will not. So what will happen is at that point, once we've evaluated the projects for readiness, then that's when that evaluation score comes in. And so let's say we have 5 projects apply and, there's only 3 projects that can proceed forward. Those are just for the sake of the example. Then what we do is we look at all of the projects and we look at those scores and we just look at the list for the numbers and say, these are the top 3 scoring projects. Those projects would proceed for that window. And then for projects that did not make it, that's where you'd be notified you completed the requirements for readiness, but you're deferred to a later round due to limited tax exempt volume on cap.
Okay, so you're not, so once you get approval from DHCD for funding, you're not going to be potentially rejected for bond financing. You may be deferred, but you wouldn't be rejected.
Yes. So for the benefit of everybody, it's something where if you apply in a round and you don't make it in that round, it doesn't mean you can't apply again. It's something where you can apply, and if you apply in July and there's limited resources and something where you can't proceed, then you can go ahead and submit another application in January. And then if we're in an environment where it is competitive, you'll be compared against that cohort of transactions.
Okay, so I think the primary concern, from the development side is we don't want to proceed with all the things that we need to do to get to bond financing until we know that we can get it, right? Like typically, we put in our soft funding applications, and then if we get the soft funding applications, then we know we have the security we need to move forward.
Yeah.
Whereas if we get a soft funding application, but then move forward, we don't have that security to know that we're then going to get our bonds.
Yeah, so that's a concern that we've heard from a lot of folks, and we can appreciate that concern. The way that we're looking at it from DHCD, from DEMPED, from DCHFA, the thought process there is that everybody's kind of in the same boat, and we want to be able to prioritize moving forward with transactions that can close within approximately 6 months. And so we're really focusing on shovel ready projects. The thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to say, you can move forward and then a project takes 12 months, 10 months, 14 months, and we have set aside tax exempt volume bond cap for a project. And that project is not coming into fruition quickly because it's not as effective of a use of the resource. And at the end of the day, we want to ensure that low income folks get housed. And I think that the best way for us to do that is to move forward with the transactions that are generally shovel ready. So we understand the concern, and I think that it's the resolution that we all came to is in terms of interagency. And then Aaron, did you want to?
Just to follow up on that question, so it sounds like there might be two different issues there where you could be ready, right, but still not receive your HFA bond allocation because the project doesn't score high enough compared to the other projects that are also. So in theory, there could be kind of this no man's land, right, where you have a project that's ready, permit wise, but doesn't quite score high enough to ever receive bond cap. So you're, on the developer side, you're kind of holding that cost indefinitely.
So that is a concern. I think that, it's something where for all states, I think that at this point, 35 states are tax exempt bond cap constrained. So, unfortunately, there's not a good answer. There's no magic bullet that solves for that, but you're right. And is anything you want to add in?
Just a quick question. So for projects that have bonds issued, but say have an overage that maybe goes beyond the 10% plus the 54% or the 4% and the 10%, is there any sort of bond reserved in each annual allocation held back for a supplemental issuance?
Yes, so that's something that we will be doing to ensure that if there's an instance where folks are over in terms of their aggregate basis, they're failing the 50% test, we are contemplating that reserve. And the one thing that we're looking at is in terms of evaluating those applications, we need to really see that you are failing that 50% test. So it becomes an ongoing conversation with the sponsor, with their accountant, who will be providing the 50% test analysis. And so if there is a supplemental bond issuance, we go ahead, we underwrite that. We do need to essentially go through the same process that you had for inducement. The project needs to be underwritten. It needs to be induced. And then you do have to receive the DC Council passive approval as well as a TEFRA, because it is for the most part. And Tracy, I think that's generally how that's working. And so, yeah, it's something where you don't have it right, you have to come back in, but we understand that that's a concern and that's been contemplated.
Thank you.
Sure. Does anybody else have any other questions or want to break for lunch? All right, we've got potbelly sandwiches in the corner, and as I mentioned before, if you guys have any general questions for DCHFA staff, DHCD staff, we'll all be milling around with the sandwiches, so feel free to grab us. And then if you want to get to know anybody from the agency, feel free to introduce yourself. Thank you for coming.
Tiger Hudson. Nice to see you again. How's it going? Good. How's the year off?
Oh, we're busy.
Very good.
Yeah, been great. Yeah, but no, I'm glad that we spent the summer thinking about this. Yeah, I heard about what happened. Not that anybody was doing. I did hear that they got to a point where they kept on reducing things.
Oh, yeah, they're just on policy.
Yeah. So we don't want to.
Absolutely. That was good. I mean, I just did five happy space things. That's it.
Yeah.
And yeah, you guys did a great job.
Yeah.
But,
And I think you guys are going to be in. You're going to be in Tampa next week.
I will be. Are you going?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can, I'll send you an email. You can have copy of it.
Yeah, no, no, great.
Yeah, we good.
Yeah, I'm excited.
We're getting on Wednesday.
I'm actually getting a peek. I didn't post the agenda, so it's just like, I have to be there on Wednesday, so I'm planning on Wednesday night, but, it seems like a nice hotel, like there's a lot of good things like that.
Yeah, so maybe, I'm just letting you family.
Yeah, so, I'm right now, I've got a 10-month-old, so
Wow.
pool hasn't opened yet, so.
That was good. I haven't had one.
Nice.
Yeah, that's it. Oh my goodness, buddy. Very, very cute. And the baby kind of obviously.
Yes. I feel like that.
Yeah, yeah. I will good.
Yeah, no, shoot me an email. I'd love to get coffee with you. There you go. So we've got an underwriting manual online. So with the underwriting manual, it's something that contemplates the underwriting process. Not something where you have to look in the underwriting manual. There's